Audio testing, 1, 2, 3. Lights on, camera rolling, and action.
Welcome to the Scaling Creator Podcast, the one-stop shop that explores problems, solutions, and stories for business-minded creators. I'm Soren Dickens.
And I'm Eriksen Dickens.
We'll be talking about everything from self-discovery, storytelling, leadership, marketing, sales, operations, and finance.
If you like a healthy dose of education mixed with a generous dash of insightful entertainment, prepare for your ears to be pleasured.
Oh, yeah. Make sure to check us out at scalingcreator.com and also join our free Discord community.
Scaling Creator launching in 3, 2, 1.
The following content is not intended for all listeners, but we strongly encourage all listeners to listen regardless. Welcome back to the Scaling Creator Podcast. I'm Soren Dickens. I'm here with Eriksen Dickens. We're here in the production van, a little different setup today. We're doing a remote interview with a special guest, Adrian Koehler. Adrian Koehler is an executive engagement and leadership coach. He's an expert and the founder of Take New Ground, a global executive coaching company that specializes in coaching executives and specifically entrepreneurs in the art and science of developing leadership skills, taking those leadership skills and applying them to their scaling businesses.
Yeah, so Adrian, thanks for joining us here today. One thing about our podcast, what we've realized through trial and error when we get this thing going, based on our feedback from our listeners, one thing that they really have seemed to appreciate so far is that we tend to dive in a lot to background and upbringing and why we became who we became, what were the events we experienced at a younger age that shaped us into the course of our life that took us to where we are now. And upon doing some research for you, we found that there's a lot of parallels between us and you. You grew up in a small, rural Friday night light town. I mean, it's funny. I heard you say that a few times. That's literally how I describe where we're from. You grew up in a fairly religious household from what we gathered. You were an athlete. You played football in college. We were collegiate athletes. So it was kind of cool on our side of things, seeing all these parallels. And so we thought it'd be interesting if we dove into your background a little bit and those specific points that I just touched on to see how your upbringing, the experiences you experienced, put you on the course of your life, and then how on our side of things it was correlated as well. So I think just diving in at first to telling us a little bit about where you were from. Tell me about that Friday Night Lights environment that you were from.
Thanks for asking. It's so great to be on with you guys. You guys are such quality. I mean, as soon as we met, I'm like, oh, I love these guys. We could hang out. So anyway, thanks for being who you are. I get your presence and I get why you're successful. So thank you.
Appreciate that.
And even the question, I appreciate the question. It just hit me. It's like I kind of got a cheat code in life in the way that, life's tough for everybody or whatever. But, we do some, I definitely was one that I was invested in as a kid. My parents were both school teachers and I did grow up in a town of 8,000 people when everybody's home and in the middle of nowhere in Illinois, 4 hours south of Chicago, hour and a half east of St. Louis. And my parents were both, amazing people, school teachers, pillars of the community. And when I say cheat code, I mean, I got to see it wasn't that overt. My parents weren't those that were like thumping, like my kids probably would complain about everything's a lesson in my household. Like I've got kids that are 9 and 7. I've got a couple older stepkids too. And any moment in time, I'm like taking a little huddle, taking a little time out, can't get off my football roots, but hey, let's call a huddle. Let's sit down and talk about what's happening. And I'm always, whatever, it'll probably be annoying to them, but hopefully they'll remember a little bit of it, of talking about what's happening and why do we make that decision and what was going on there. Even like when we're at a restaurant and I'll like talk with a waitress and something will happen. And I said, did you notice what I did there? And I'll stop and like have them, notice what's going on and try to tune their thinking and how they make decisions. My parents weren't quite like that. They did though live by example. And the cheat code in life is that people matter most, is that no matter what you're doing vocationally, if you don't generate a positive environment around you where people feel seen, heard, connected with, it's going to be a pretty lonely life. I mean, I coach fast-moving founders all day long that are smarter than most people on the planet, more ambitious than most people on the planet. But what they're missing is that the people matter most around them. They tend to treat people like a utility, like a tool. And then therefore, if they're treating other people like that, they're treating themselves like that. So they're like running themselves like a machine and then wonder when they lift their head up after 3 years and they made all their millions of dollars, why there's no meaning in their life, or their wife doesn't like them anymore, or their kids forgot their name, that kind of stuff. So, and I grew up in that environment. I call it the Friday Night Lights environment, just because I was the youngest of 2 brothers. My brother was a hoss, we would have called him in Illinois, big dude, set all the records, in every sport he played. And I wasn't. I was the runt of the litter of two, smaller. What that gave me, though, was the necessity for tenacity.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was going to compete, and we were a very sports family, and if I was going to compete or even get close to what my brother Courtney's his name, I had to outwork him. And I had to, early, part of the cheat code was when I was in 7th grade, there was a gym that opened up in my town. And me and like 7 of the kids from my, junior high days, this guy, Craig Roberts, opened up Roberts Gym, and he pulled us all under his arm and like taught us how to lift. And that became really a great framework that I could put on a lot of weight and I could throw a lot of weight. And I, while not as fast, didn't have the vertical of all these kids from Chicago that were playing football at Milliken where I played, I would outwork them and I could outdrive them. And I was used to getting up on my own, going to the weight room at 5:30 in the morning when nobody told me to.
Yeah.
And doing the extra reps after practice and nobody told me to. So I had to, if I wanted to compete, and I'm really competitive. It was a joy for me to do it. And I grew up in a faith background, which I'm really grateful for. I've kept, I don't know what percentage of that faith background, definitely the morals of it, definitely the ethics of it, definitely the lifestyle of it. I'm not at all into being religious in the sense that most religious folks are quite stodgy, very cautious. I'm on the other side. I think faith equals risk. And so go take a risk and go be alive and actually go, I come from a Judeo-Christian background. So this idea of grace, meaning that, we're given more than we deserve. And this idea of mercy, that we're forgiven for what we deserve. Those are pretty two big concepts. I believe both of them. Therefore, let it rip. If you mess it up, great. For me, the love of God is pervasive. And so anyway, I won't get into all that. I have a master's in theology. So if you want to go talk about all that stuff, we could dance if you want to. I was acculturated into a Christian background, which I live in LA now. And there's a lot of flimsiness,
Mm-hmm.
at least that's probably the nicest way of saying it. A lot of flimsiness in people's ethical background. It is very transactional out here. People are scared to death. It's an image-based culture. So I don't live an image-based lifestyle. I don't have flimsy ethics.
Right.
I am very straightforward, and people matter to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm unapologetic about that. And I'm going to get hurt and betrayed and, ignored and stepped on and used. And they're going to want to do that to me, but it's no problem for me because I know who I am.
Yeah.
So that gets back to my spiritual roots. I know who I am. I know what I'm committed to. So I can dance. I'm not doing the math most people are doing in a room. Most people are trying to be the most interesting person in the room. That's what the human brain wants to do. That's what the ego wants to do, is impress people. Now that's there for me, but it's like a 2 out of 10 volume. What's at a 10 out of 10 volume is while I might not be the most interesting person in the room, I am the most interested person in the room. Like, I'm curious about what's going on for other people and who they are and what they're up to and what their challenges are. And outside of my home life growing up, I was always the weird one for lots of reasons, but I was always like the psychologically interested one, the philosophically tilted one. I want to know, I remember being a young kid and sitting around the dinner table and Wheel of Fortune's on and Pat Sajak's doing his thing and there's Vanna, hello Vanna, and doing the whole thing. And I just wanted to talk, how do you build friendships? Let's talk about that. How do you, this thing's happening at school and that teacher did this. Why did she do, I was always just troubled, not the right word, interested in how people worked. Anyway, I could tell obviously long stories, but I had grandparents until I was 30, all 4 grandparents.
Wow.
And they were all very close. And my parents are still married to this day.
Nice.
And they're great people. We're very distinct. And, there's lots of things I do that they would never do. And they think I'm crazy and they will never understand my work, which is great. And when they come to LA, they don't drive. They're scared to death. I've always wanted diversity. It was all a very white town that I grew up in. I couldn't wait to get to the big city to have diversity and thought as well as ethnically. And I just love variety. And so there's lots of things that I do that my parents didn't put in me. And I don't know where that came from. Maybe because I made up that, there was a mentor, I remember, a guy named Erwin, that I ended up working for later in life. He said, if you become someone that will do what other people are unwilling to do, you'll stand out.
Sure.
And so, lots of stories in my life of me being like the only white guy in the inner city of Chicago, or me, when when the earthquake in Haiti happened, I brought 8 doctors and we went and set up health clinics within a few days. Or anyway, I could tell I ran leadership trainings in prison with murderers. I've been the health consigliere of the brother-in-law of the king of Qatar. And I was there for 2 years and taking care, not 2 years, 2 months. I was there taking care of him because of my healthcare background. My undergrad was in nursing. I don't do anything like that now. But anyway, I've been around Why? Because life is fun. It's meant to be explored. It's like, I know I'm going to die. I know that. I don't know when that's going to be. So I might as well make it count. And so that edge, that drive has always been very present with me, which has made me really intense and crazy for a lot of people, which I totally understand.
Mm-hmm.
As I've gotten older, I'm 43 now. I just don't care. If I'm too much for somebody, then I just don't need to hang out with that somebody. I'm perfect for a smaller portion of the population, and that works for me.
No, yeah, I think that's so cool.
It was a long answer. I'm sorry for that long answer.
No,
it was great.
Perfect.
Yeah, it really kind of tells your story right out of where you came from. And I liked how you touched on the hard work and outworking people, maybe being the smaller guy. How is that translated into your leadership style, and through the process of developing your leadership style? Were you looking back at that as a superpower, or was that your way to stand out through your developmental ages? How does that play into who you've become today, and how does that play into who you work with, these founders who are really hardworking? They'll outwork anyone, 20-hour days, that mentality that probably isn't really healthy, but how do you bring that into your practice?
It's a good question. You've got me thinking about my roots now. So
that's our goal.
For those that are listening that aren't into this religious background, please excuse me for a second, but I'll tell you the real answer. There's a story in the scriptures. There's a very famous guy named Paul that was like one of the first kind of spiritual entrepreneurs, we'll call him. He was like an entrepreneur. He literally had a tent making business. He was converted. He used to kill Christians, and then he actually became a leader and probably the most successful evangelist in the New Testament story. And he had this little sidekick named Timothy. And he was trying to invest all that he had in Timothy. And there's this one verse that comes to mind when you ask that question. And it just goes like this. I haven't thought about this in 20 years. But the verse goes something like, don't let them look down on you because you were young, but set an example for them in life and love and speech and faith and purity. Are you impressed? I remember that. I'm impressed. I'll look that up and see if that's actually true. But anyway, that was like an anthem for me. Like, don't let them look down on you because you're young. Set an example for them in life and love and speech and faith and purity. And, that was my thing. I know that I got into leadership because I was the most comfortable if I was at the helm, so I kind of got into leadership because I feel most comfortable when I'm calling the shot. Not like I have to, and I'm not some arrogant jerk. I just feel more comfortable if I'm in the room making the decisions. And if I'm in a room or on a team or whatever, and things aren't going well, and I have a sense that I've got no power to influence it, I don't stay in that room very often. Mm-hmm. I just know that if I'm going to be involved, I need to be involved in the decision-making process. So that was baked into me young. I don't think overtly from my parents. It was definitely an invitation. And there was some pride in my family, like the Koehlers do it this way. But it was subtle. But my mom always said to me, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And that ethic is helpful because most people love to be a part of the problem by just not doing something or complaining about something. And in my family, we just don't complain that long. We can have complaints like everybody else, but are you going to do something about it, or are you going to shut your mouth? Those are kind of the two options. You're either going to make it better or shut your mouth. Right. To your question, though, about the people I work with, even now, I've been at this for, I think, 13 years, coaching leaders, especially when I got started. All my clients were a lot older than me, and all of them had a lot better resumes than I did on paper. I found out that there's certain things I do that they can't do. Certain things I'm willing to do, a lot of things I'm willing to do that they're not willing to do. And I need to focus on those things. So if I'm coaching a world-class physicist, a client named Josh comes to mind. He built Virgin Hyperloop and got out of that. And now he's building this AI-driven defense company called Gambit. And, I'm never going to match this guy's engineering prowess. I won't ever, nor do I even want to. But yet learning how to generate the type of environment on his team where honesty and trust and reconciliation happen, I'm good at that. I'm probably world-class at that, at talking about issues in a way that brings people closer. When most people would say, here's the issue, that's why we're apart. And I say, no, here's the issue, here's how you talk about it. And all of a sudden, it magnetizes the room. It brings people closer. We go from conflict to connection. Right. I'm really good at that. So I ended up not wanting to be, not at all competing with my clients for their expertise. They're the expert, and that's great. I just want to show them things they're blind to, and then create an environment in which they can learn And it always requires a whole lot of courage to do it. And I'm pretty gutsy. Like I call myself, I'm committed to being a fierce advocate for them. And advocate kind of makes sense. I'm there to help them get what they want, but fierce in the sense that like I love them. I do love them, number one. And, usually in business, people don't talk about love, but they better, because that's what makes the world happen. And I love them. So I want the best for them. And I love them so much, I'm going to at least offer them what I see as the truth. And I might be wrong about it, but I'm going to say things to them that no one else dare say to them. So it's not a precious relationship. It's like we're hand-to-hand combat for their benefit. And they end up loving it. And we have tons of trust. And I get to learn a whole bunch of fun stuff and see I'm in so many industries because I'm able to be that very specific voice for these world-renowned, brilliant leaders that most people don't have the courage to step in. So the short answer to your question is I double down on what I am uniquely good at. And most of what I'm uniquely good at does not involve a textbook. It involves heart. It involves courage. And nobody can take that away. And courage does not require a resume. It's just a choice. And that keeps me on the edge of my seat. I love what I do.
Mm-hmm. That's important.
Yeah. You talked a lot about like bringing people together, building interpersonal relationships. From our point of view, our upbringing, we think a lot about the community that we were raised in. And it's one of those communities that truly seems to care about itself, and people have each other's backs. And our small town is actually a little bit bigger than yours. It was like 20,000 growing up. But we really felt that, and we feel on our end that that's what's really helped us in terms of bringing people up around us, regardless of where we go. And the more we've traveled, the more we've seen of the world, the big cities, wherever we go, we notice there's a difference. And obviously you moved to LA. It's a long ways away from small town Illinois. Yep. So I'm curious, in your opinion, what exactly are the pros and cons of being raised in a smaller, tight-knit community where people kind of know each other, and then being raised in a big city? Do you think who has more the advantage? I know it's not as black and white as that, but I want to kind of pick at that a little bit and then talk about how that transition was for you coming out of that environment, going to the big city where, values probably aren't quite as strong. Like you said, people generally are more flimsy. So if you can give us a little bit about your thoughts on that, because we have our thoughts, but I want to know a little bit about yours overall.
Well, I'd probably start with, if we talk about the pros, I'd start with probably where you started. Like there is a pride in the community, and you're seen, right? Like if you walk with my parents through the local Walmart, it takes a long time. Why? Because they know every single person and everybody knows them. And they were school teachers for 35 years in the community. So, they know several generations. They taught several generations. When you have babies, when you're 20, you can do that. They're known. And that's got pros and cons to it, by the way, especially if you're a crazy teenager like I was. Shoot, all these police officers know my name and they know where I live. And do I need to talk to Coach Koehler about that? What's going on here, son? No, sir. Pros are, there's a sense of accountability because you're committed to the community. And there's really no place to hide. People know who you are. And I think it's more relationships are at the core, because you're in a smaller environment together and you're going to be there and everybody's going to know each other. So relationships and how you relate to one another and what you do, and there's plenty of gossip mill and whatever in a small town as well. So you got to protect your reputation and really how to generate a great one. Like my dad's still in the city council and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of pros to that. And what else is pros? I mean, there's everything is within reach as well. That's helpful. I'm talking about sports. I'm talking about festivals. I'm talking about all that. Like you're just a phone call away from whatever you want to go do. And everything's really friendly. I guess this is going to be recorded. I rarely even lock my front door. I live in LA, but I didn't grow up locking my front door at all. It's just people are good. And so you kind of also, a big pro is that people are good. Mm-hmm. And we're not living scared. So the handful of pros there's probably, I can make a long list of them. Cons of being in a small town is it can be quite myopic and quite ethnocentric in a certain way. Like if I walk around my little hometown church and here comes Adrian's back and all these people that are probably 65 years old now or whatever have known me since I was in diapers. You still out in LA? Yep, still out in LA. How's it going out there? I watch the news. Looks like it's going to hell in a handbasket. I'm like, oh, thanks, man. And all of their judgments of LA, and I always ask them just for fun. I said, "Have you ever been to LA?" They're like, "No." Yeah. Okay, well, why don't you come on out? And of course, they never will. So it can be quite myopic and a little bit superior in my experience. And all that, usually any competition that's generated like that comes out of fear. So a con is not being able to really operate in the context of diversity. You're good at being a leader when people look like you and think like you and act like you, but can you lead well and bring together all these disparate groups of people from all these different backgrounds, different worldviews, and can you generate a conversation that brings diversity together? That's a con that you don't get that in a small town.
Right.
And there's a little bit of, probably because you're so close and going to be with people for a long time, I think one of the cons that's pretty prevalent is that people don't deal with conflict.
Yeah.
They aren't willing to have the tough conversation because they'll romanticize it and say, "Oh, it's no big deal. I'll play the long game." And but really they're just avoiding it and have cowardice instead of actually dealing with something. So it's a little more self-flattering or quote unquote nice instead of really what I think about like being kind. Like kindness involves clarity. Kindness involves conviction. Niceness is a little more superficial. So it's a little superficial that way. Yeah. I mean, I was the first one in my family to have a passport, for example. First one to leave the country. I couldn't wait to do it.
Where'd you go your first time out of the country?
I went to France. 95% of the kids in my high school took Spanish. And I knew the Spanish teacher was a nut job. And there was like 10 of us that took French. And I took French. And I took all 3 years that were available. And then we went together as a whole group to go to France when I was 17, which was a blast. And then soon after that, I went to Mexico on like a quote unquote missions trip with my church. And we built a house, which was really great. And then, I've filled up a whole passport with stamps since then. And traveling has been a big part of my lifestyle, both for pleasure and a lot for purpose and taking teams overseas and that kind of stuff. I was a pastor for many years, so took a lot of teams to go do some courageous, awesome, fun, exhilarating, life-altering work for them and for the people we were helping.
You mentioned the difficulty of small town communities dealing with conflict and addressing the conflict and getting the resolution that they need. We see that a lot in our small community. We see that a lot in our small team too, and we see that a lot in small teams. How do you work with founders and teams to create that effective communication? How do you go in and identify the issues and talk about your process with that? Because I think that's a huge thing. Everything can be solved with a conversation, and we see that quite often with small teams and in small communities. There's that almost chirp behind your back. I'll go tell him, but I won't tell you. Become somewhat passive.
Passive aggressive is what it cultivates.
You see families falling apart over it. You see teams falling apart over that. So please tell us about your process.
Well, there's a lot of lies that people eat for breakfast. And they're just used to them and they're very socially acceptable. But they're a lie in the sense that like they're not authentic, let alone they're not at all worthy of our time and energy. One of them is the one that people say all the time is I'm not good with conflict. Not that that's not true. Of course it's true. But actually, when you declare something like that, you're actually claiming it for the future.
Right.
And so there's a future in that statement, but there's also a huge back door, right? You're giving yourself permission to not deal with what's at hand. So first off, you need to illuminate what the belief system is behind the behavior. The behavior is always a symptom. The causative factor is always what's being believed. Right. And where perception is coming from. And when I say a lie, I mean what they have believed. Maybe they believed it for their whole lives. So it seems like true for them. But it's not the only thing possible. Because if someone says I'm not good at conflict, I will first sit with them and say, well, let's talk about this. Let's say you're right. What future's coming if you continue to be right about that for the next 10 years? Let's just play a game. How bad's it going to get? And it gets pretty bad. And it costs them a lot of time, a lot of joy. It costs them a lot of energy, usually costs them a lot of money. So then I'll just say, do you want that deal? So you're making a deal. Your deal is I'm not good at conflict and I'll sign up for all this heartache. There are payoffs to it. The payoffs are you get to be irresponsible. You get to be avoidant. You get to look good in your own eyes. You get to be superior. All these other payoffs, hidden payoffs. We call it a racket in my work. All these payoffs, but there's tons of prices. Do you want the deal? You're always no. Okay, good. So you're not good at conflict, but do you want to get good at conflict? And even that is funny, right? Because I'm really good at conflict, but I'm not I don't focus on the conflict. I focus on the purpose of integrating these conversations, because that's the purpose. The purpose is peace. The purpose is joy. It's not like conflict is the purpose. No, that's a necessary evil to get to what we want, which is camaraderie, which is connection, which is alignment, which is integration. Like, that's the purpose. So people usually focus on the problem instead of focus on the purpose. And I don't say that in a flowery way, but it's a big deal on what most people are focused on not losing or playing not to lose instead of playing to win. And if I focus on playing to win, I'm willing to suffer for it. What's my process? You want me to like play out a scenario? Let's say there's a group. Let's say it's a videography company. Shall we do that? Let's say there's a videography company. There's a couple good looking brothers that are owners. Let's just say that, and they've got a team, and they've got these consultants that are in, and let's just say they've hired this consultant or this first shooter, just for example, that keeps being late on the job. Let's say he's late for the shoot, and that's a problem. People usually have like a stilted conversation about that. They might just be angry at the person. They might just not say anything and not hire them again. They might just talk crap about the person behind their back, and then it comes out passive aggressively. There's all these things people do. What's the conversation to have? Well, the conversation to have is to pull the guy aside and say, "Hey, Alonzo, I noticed you're late, man. Are you okay?" That's where to start the conversation, because I say a broken commitment is a cry for help. Once again, back to the belief system. Mm-hmm. If I've got an agreement with someone, most people don't do this part well, is if I hire you, I'm actually paying you this money. And here's the promises that are baked into that I'm expecting from you, that you're going to be on time, you're going to be professional, you're going to get this type of work product. And let me not be, most people hire really poorly and they don't have all these conversations up front. If you have these conversations up front, then you've got an agreement with the person, not just transactional, not like I'll pay you for this product, but how you are on the team. That's a part of the agreement. What I can expect of you and how you show up and your commitment and your professionalism. That's actually a whole part of it. We all want that, but most people are scared to death to have that conversation, either because they don't hold themselves to a standard or they're scared to death of having conflict. So rather under communicate and just resent later instead of over communicating, seeing if there's actual alignment, and then actually be able to lean on that agreement, because the agreements we have in life give us true north. Like, that's what we can count on. There's like two things that bind human beings. Bitterness is one of them. We know that. That's why people gossip. And the other is a promise. Those are two things that bind human beings neurologically. So an agreement is a set of promises, right? So I've got an agreement with Alonzo. And if Alonzo's late, I could just be angry at him or talk crap about him or whatever. Or I could actually have compassion for him because he's outside of integrity for himself. And that deserves compassion to begin with. Just to begin with, because that's a great opening for a conversation. So, Alonzo, I saw that you're late today, man. Are you okay? And he'll say, "Oh yeah, traffic was bad," or this blah, blah happened at home. It's like, okay, because that this is what I expect, right? Is for you to be on time, like no matter what. Of course, if there's an emergency, I understand. But if you're just late because of traffic, that's obviously, you'll just need to leave 20 minutes earlier. You didn't check the thing. So can you be on time moving forward, like no matter what? And then you wait. Most people will just have that conversation, just say that, and just, I expect you to be on time, and they move on, and they don't sit there and see how the person relates to their word. Because if someone's not going to keep their word, you ought to pay them, because you're just rolling a dice with them. But if they can keep their word and they're committed to keeping their word, now we've got a way to connect to one another. And even in the breakdown can be an opportunity to connect together. Let me keep working this out. Hopefully it'll be helpful for listeners. If Alonzo is late the second time, now we've got a deeper conversation, because he actually promised me that he'd be on time. And now I want to get in a conversation with him around what was more important than keeping his commitment. Now I'm having this conversation for myself, obviously, because I'm paying him, but I'm also having it, this is the tough part for people, I'm having it for him. Because even if I fire him after this, I actually care about the guy. And most people won't do that. Most people just have transactional relationships, and I pay you, so shut your mouth and do the job. That's a pretty low level of leadership. If you're committed to the people, then you're going to have this robust conversation with Alonzo. Something might shift for him, and it works out really great. And if you've been loyal to him and had the full-on conversation, he's going to trust you like he's never trusted anybody before. But if you have the great full conversation, he's not up for it, that's great. You should go work on another team, man, because I'm never going to get off of our commitments. You can count on me. I'm going to keep my word to you 100% of the time. And if I blow it, I'm going to clean it up immediately. And I expect that of everybody, that you're going to live your word 100% of the time. And if you don't, you're going to clean it up immediately. And if you don't want to hold yourself like that, don't get on my team, because I'm going to be like a trouble for you, because I'm severe in keeping our word. I'm really loving and fun, and we'll goof off and all that. But at the end of the day, all we've got is if someone will keep their word or not, especially when the tensions get up, especially when chaos and complications come into a system. You need to be able to count on people to keep their word. So conflict is really around how people orient themselves to their own promises. And you can have a ton of grace in it, but don't have grace unless you have truth as well, because otherwise you have no reference point. And I don't tolerate any gossip on my team from me or anybody else. We have a 48-hour rule. Like if my business partner came to me complaining about somebody on my team, I would ask him, hey, Dan, have you talked to Chad about this? I'll listen to him, and maybe he needs to vent, and I'll say, have you talked to Chad about this? And he'll say yes or no. If he said no, well, why haven't you? And we'll talk about all of his reasons why he hasn't, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, great. Well, 48 hours, man. You got 48 hours to talk to him. And if you don't, I'm going to go talk to Chad, and I'm going to send him your way. So because we don't just tolerate loose complaints around my organization. You got 48 hours, or I'm going to go talk to Chad, because we're going to keep this culture really clean. Most people are unwilling to have that type of culture because it seems like a lot more work. It's actually a long-term major win, and people spend a lot less time complaining and spend a lot more time solving issues. And they take on humility, because I blow it with my team. Even this morning at a finance meeting, I was a minute late. First thing I said is, hey, please forgive me. Please forgive me. I was a minute late. Now, is that a big deal? I own the company. I can be a minute late, but it's a big deal. Why? Because it's on my calendar for 9 a.m. and I was on at 9:01. And why? Because I wanted to go make some coffee. So I got on and said, hey, please forgive me. I was sluggish and I wanted to make some coffee. Are we okay? Oh, yeah, no problem. Okay, cool. Let's go. So we want to keep a tidy culture in that way. Most people, that seems extreme for people, and that's fine. But and you inherit the promises you break. There's a future baked in them. See if I answered the question very well. Is that good enough? Do you have other questions about that? Maybe I'll pause for a second. I could talk for hours.
Well, I love it. I think that example that you just painted is very familiar with our community, and it's something that we're always dealing with, something with production in terms of accountability or having to have those difficult conversations. So yeah, you nailed it. Our audience is going to love that.
Yeah, I'm glad that we have this recorded, because we're going to rewatch that and study all that and break it down and apply it.
Alonzo's actually a friend of mine now. He was a consultant for a company I worked with back in the past. So I had a lot of conversations about Alonzo. Hey, Alonzo, you probably won't be listening to this, but he's a buddy of mine now. And he was always late for things. So actually that was a real example.
That's awesome. Yeah. So in the process of having those difficult conversations, when you work with a founder or an organization, what are the things that you see that throw up the red flags in an organization or in a small team? Like, we're talking 3 or 4 people, the dynamics. How do you identify that, or how can people self-identify those issues?
I think the question is what are the traditional problems I see on a small team?
Yeah, so some of the listeners can maybe look at their dynamics and say, hey, I see that in our organization, or I see that coming.
So let's see. There's lots of them. I'll start with what comes up first. First challenge for every human being is to break up a natural bias, and it's probably the most pervasive bias for human beings, which is that other people think the way I think. We all think that this is the way humans are. So because it's the way I am, so I assume other people operate the way I operate. That's a bias. It's false, right? So it's a blind spot. Especially if there's been a solopreneur that's now been so successful, they now need a team to pull it off. They need to break up the idea that their team is not as good as they are, probably. And they'll resent them for not being as good as they are, but they ought to get real, because if they were as good as they were, they'd have their own company. They don't. They want to work for yours, So first off, put your arms around that. That's probably the case. So, and most solopreneurs are really high performers, and leading is very distinct from performing. So leadership is generating results through other people. That's essentially what leadership is, right? We're going to get this done, but I'm going to get it done through others. Most solopreneurs that have a team are still really involved in the weeds, and usually pretty erratically. They will delegate it to somebody. I put that in quotes for people listening. They'll delegate it to somebody, which is usually poorly instructed tasks. Their delegation is usually very flimsy. Like, they assume the other person needs about as much information as they would need. And if you're an entrepreneur, I don't need any instructions. I'm going to go figure it out, right? And I'm driven, and I'm not going to stop, and I'm smart, and blah, blah, blah. Other people aren't like that. So I say to my clients all the time, what you do most naturally, you probably teach most poorly. So for a leader of a company, they need to understand all these biases. And it's just in our blind spots. We don't even realize it because it's just so natural for us. And what we do really naturally, we don't even know. I mean, there's aspects of my work I'm really good at, like probably top percentage in the world at. And when I try to get people on my team to do what I do, they can't, at least not at the level I can do it. I don't say this arrogantly. It's just what it is, right? Like I'm sitting next to a guy on a plane. He pays me lots of money by the end of that plane ride. Why? I'm really good at enrolling people into work. I'm top tier at it in the wild, unfiltered, straight up, build trust, get in a deep conversation. They want to work with me. A lot of, especially coaches, they're not as good at that. They want to be like, anyway, I won't dog on coaches. I could dog for a long time.
We could too, based on some of the people that we work. Yeah, we get it. We get what you're saying.
I bet you can. There's a lot of coaches that want to work for me and they don't last a conversation. Point being, I need help studying how I'm good at what I'm good at. Most leaders don't invite other people to study themselves because I can't see myself that clearly. Other people can see, and I can really do some post-game film work on how did that do that, or let them really ask questions, because there's a lot of intuitive bias, and I just do what's really natural for me, and it works. Not all the time, but it works a lot of the time. They need to study it though. It needs to be more science instead of art. So I need to invite them to help me understand why I'm good at what I'm good at. And most leaders need to just own that. It takes humility to own your greatness. And so if you're really great at something, you ought to act like you're great at it because you are, but also be great at it in a way like a teacher would, because the purpose of it is to scale at your organization. Anyway, that generates a lot of tension on teams because the boss thinks other people ought to think like they think and do what they do, but they haven't understood that it's natural for them and they haven't taught it really well. So you need to slow down and instruct people through the process. And really, they don't get clear on the principles by which they're making their decisions, and they don't teach the principles. And if you teach the principles, those scale a lot faster than the plans, because the principles can work in lots of environments. And the way of looking and the way of thinking and the way of decision making and the way you treat other people and what you're committed to and your rigor and your stand and your edge and all that. I'm edgy. You guys can tell I can be really edgy, and I'm edgy though with a purpose, not because I just want to be a jerk. It's purposeful. I'll insert tension into a conversation for the sake of the mission, for the sake of the person I'm talking to. But you don't want people just walking around being edgy because they think it's cool. No, it's got to have a purpose to it.
Right.
So what else are the challenges? So delegation is a big one. That kind of leadership bias is a big one. Most people, we call it the sandwich principle. Most people, trouble comes to you like shit hors d'oeuvre, something good is off a little bit. And who wants to eat shit hors d'oeuvre? So you don't. So you send it back to the kitchen. Well, here it comes back as a sandwich. And, who wants to eat that? So you don't. You send it back to the kitchen. And it comes as a 2-course meal. Soon you've got a buffet. You got problems. And why do you have problems? Because when it was small, you were unwilling to talk about it. And you had all your stories about it. I don't have time, or I don't want to be a jerk, or blah, 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 all your self-flattering reasons. But it's responsible to deal with something when it's small. It actually helps not create the type of conflict that is coming if the thing gets bigger and gets worse. And most people wait, usually for their own self-protection. They wait to deal with it until it's bad. Then they just have to fire somebody, or they're so bitter, or they've turned the team against the guy, or there's just a curse on the guy, really, where it's he's always like this and people talk trash about him all the time, instead of caring enough about the person, caring enough about the mission to talk about something when it's really small. Because people have this aversion to having tough conversations, quote unquote tough, even that, it's not that tough. It's tidy. It's helpful. It's resourceful. It's loving to have a little bit of attention in the conversation for the sake of the other person. Most people don't do that. And for good reason. They were a one-man shop and now they got 3 people. And it's a lot for them. And nobody teaches this stuff. I mean, there's a million books about it, but nobody reads them, let alone do they practice it and have the type of humility and loyalty and honor to really stand for what they say they stand for. So those are a few things. I know we're running tight on time, but I could go on for hours.
It's great. Yeah.
Awesome.
We are running tight on time. Where can our audience find you? I know you have events all over the world. You have a company, you have a social media presence. So tell us where our audience can find you, and talk about your events as well.
Easiest free way is obviously Instagram, adrian.k on Instagram. You can go absorb that stuff there. You can listen to our podcast. We have a podcast called the Naked Leadership Podcast. We talk about these deeper issues of leadership where the struggle really is. It's never strategic. It's rarely tactical. It's usually interpersonal or around the concept of self-mastery, like how is one taking on themselves as their first project, which is every leader's responsibility, is lead themselves impeccably. Most people, if they just focused on that, their lives would get a lot better. So you can listen to the Naked Leadership Podcast. We do have events all over the world. We work deeply in specific companies. We have public trainings that anybody can come to. One's coming up in a few weeks. I'm sure this won't post in time for that. That's called the Revenant Process, REVENANT. wearerevenant.com. If you find me on Instagram and DM me, I'll send you the link, or you guys can post it. wearerevenant.com. We have another one coming up in February in Boise, Idaho. That's a personal leadership accelerant process. 4 days, deep dive, no nonsense. It's amazing. I went through it like 15 years ago, and now I get to co-lead it with my business partner, who is an absolute stud, the best in the world. He's the best in the world at leadership transformation. His name is Dan Tacchini. If Mother Teresa and Yoda and Tony Soprano had a baby, that's Dan Tacchini. He's a fascinating guy. If you want to get your life to get better, get around Dan. That's what I did. I hired him, and now we're partners. So we've got another thing called Icon. We got a lot of stuff coming up. So if you just go to takenewground.com, you'll hear about all that, or just DM me, connect with me. I love people. I'd love to talk to anybody that's in this crux, working with me, maybe working with my team for sure. I've got, especially for videographers, one of my key members of my team, his name's Chad Brown. He runs Shade Tree Films, very successful cinematography company. And he's one of our master coaches now. He's my right hand. Anybody that I don't coach, that I'd love to coach, but don't have the time or they don't have the budget for it, Chad works with him. And he's just like me. He's even more likable than me. So go work with Chad. He's awesome. And anyway, love to support anybody. So reach out. Life's short. My final thing, life is short. It's probably not going to get better until you take courageous action. And courageous action is never about information. It's just about having the guts to go take a stand for something. And you need somebody with you because you're full of crap, as am I. I need help. I can't do surgery on myself. I need help, somebody that's my advocate, that'll stand up for me, stand up to me because they're standing up for me. Work with a coach. I would strongly suggest, don't have to work with me or my team. Work with somebody that's really rigorous. Most coaches aren't. Work with us. We love people.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate your time and the conversation. That was amazing. Our audience is going to absolutely love it. I know we did. Yeah, that was
There's a lot of value in there.
Tons of value.
That.
So we'll keep in touch.
All right. Thank you so much.
Enjoy your week.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Awesome. See you, fellas.
Bye.
Thanks.